The sun hung low over the Utah Badlands on a Thursday afternoon when Dr. Michael Harrison spotted something that shouldn't exist. His team had been excavating near a remote canyon for 3 weeks, searching for evidence of ancient settlements. Instead, they found something impossibly older. It was buried 15 feet below the canyon floor, nestled between layers of rock that geological surveys indicated were over 50,000 years old. The object itself was unlike anything Harrison had seen in his 23 years as an archaeologist. It was roughly the size of a compact car, but its shape defied easy description. Some angles were sharp and geometric, while others curved in ways that seemed to shift depending on how you looked at them. The surface gleamed with a dark metallic sheen that didn't reflect light so much as absorb it, creating an almost three-dimensional depth that made your eyes hurt if you stared too long. "This shouldn't be here," whispered Sarah Chin, Harrison's lead graduate student, running her gloved fingers along the smooth surface. She pulled her hand back quickly, startled. "It's warm. Dr. Harrison, it's actually warm." Harrison knelt beside the artifact, his weathered hands trembling slightly. At 61 years old, he'd spent his entire career documenting human history. He knew the story of our species, the slow climb from caves to civilization. But this object didn't fit that narrative anywhere. The craftsmanship was too precise, too perfect. No tool marks. No corrosion despite its apparent age. No explanation. Within 48 hours, the discovery had been classified as a matter of national security. Within a week, the site was transformed into a high-security research facility. The artifact, which everyone simply called the artifact because no one could agree on what else to call it, was carefully extracted and transported to a specialized laboratory in a classified location deep beneath the Nevada desert. The facility was state-of-the-art. Dr. James Okafor, a physicist who'd made his name studying quantum mechanics, took the lead on the analysis. He was a methodical man, 48 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair and a reputation for solving impossible problems. The kind of scientist who looked at the universe and demanded answers. "It's not responding to anything," Okafor said 3 weeks into the research, frustration evident in his voice. He was standing in the observation room with Harrison and Director Elizabeth Vasquez of the Department of Advanced Research. Through the reinforced glass, they could see the artifact positioned on a specially designed platform, surrounded by sophisticated equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. They'd tried everything logical. They'd bombarded it with radiation across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. They'd attempted electrical stimulation with varying frequencies and intensities. They'd run the most advanced scanning equipment known to modern science across every inch of its surface. Their supercomputers had analyzed its molecular structure, processed terabytes of data, created three-dimensional models from every conceivable angle. Nothing worked. "There must be a frequency we're missing," suggested Dr. Marcus Webb, one of Okafor's team members, a younger man in his 30s with bright red hair and an almost manic energy. "Some harmonic resonance we haven't discovered yet." "We've tried 6,000 different frequencies," Okafor replied, his patience visibly wearing thin. "We've subjected this object to conditions that would destroy any known material on Earth. And it hasn't so much as blinked." Director Vasquez watched in silence, her expression unreadable. She'd served in the military for 20 years before transitioning to government research. She understood the implications of this discovery better than anyone. If this artifact was extraterrestrial in origin, and the evidence was becoming increasingly overwhelming, then humanity's place in the universe needed to be reconsidered. And if it was a weapon or a device with any kind of technological advantage, every nation on Earth would move heaven and earth to access it. "Keep working," she said finally. "But expand your thinking. If traditional scientific methods aren't working, then we need to approach this differently." That night, Harrison couldn't sleep. He sat in his temporary quarters, a small room in the residential section of the underground facility, and thought about what they were dealing with. An object from another world. A relic from a civilization so advanced that their technology appeared magical to modern science. He pulled out his personal journal and began writing. "What if we're asking the wrong questions? We've been treating this artifact like a puzzle to be solved through logic and force. But what if it's not a machine in the way we understand machines? What if it's something else entirely? I keep thinking about my daughter, Emma. She called me last week crying about her divorce. She's had such a hard year. And all I could do was offer logical advice, financial planning, legal strategy, practical steps forward. But what she really needed was for me to simply be there, to understand her pain. I failed her in that moment because I was thinking like a scientist, not like a father. What if the artifact is the same way? What if it needs something we can't measure or quantify? He closed the journal without knowing how prophetic those words would become. A month passed. Then 6 weeks. The research continued, but the initial excitement had worn off, replaced by a grinding frustration. The artifact remained inert, unresponsive, utterly indifferent to humanity's technological prowess. The team expanded. Specialists from around the world were brought in. Physicists, engineers, materials scientists, even a linguist named Dr. Rachel Foster who specialized in deciphering ancient codes. Rachel was a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity. She'd spent 15 years studying lost languages, and she brought a different perspective to the problem. While the scientists focused on how the artifact worked, she became obsessed with understanding why it was here. Ancient civilizations left messages for future generations, she argued during one of the research meetings. Cave paintings, monuments, written records. If this object was left here deliberately, maybe it's not a tool. Maybe it's a message. Maybe we're supposed to understand something. But even her insights didn't crack the problem. Week after week, the artifact remained silent. Then came the day that everything changed. Dr. Sofia Martinez had joined the team as a secondary researcher, primarily tasked with documenting the psychological effects of the discovery on the research team itself. She was a psychologist by training, a woman of 35 with warm brown eyes and an empathetic manner that put people at ease. She wasn't supposed to interact directly with the artifact, that was protocol. But on a Friday evening she broke that protocol. She'd been reading files on her personal tablet, sitting in the observation room while the night shift skeleton crew ran their automated tests. One file was about the original discovery, photographs from the Utah site, interviews with the local tribes who lived near the canyon. One particular passage caught her attention. An indigenous elder named Thomas Running Deer had been interviewed by archaeologists. He'd spoken about the canyon as a sacred place, a site where his people had come for generations to connect with the spiritual world. He described ceremonies where members of his tribe would sit in silence for hours, entering a state of deep meditation and communion. He talked about feeling a presence in that canyon, not threatening but aware. Watching. Waiting. The quote that struck Sophia most deeply was, "The canyon held something patient. Something that had been waiting longer than we have memories. We always felt it was waiting for something from us. A recognition. An understanding." Sophia found herself standing up, walking toward the sealed chamber where the artifact rested. A security guard moved to stop her, but she flashed her credentials and ducked under the barrier. She stood before the reinforced glass, separated from the artifact by only a few feet. In the artificial light of the laboratory, it looked even more alien, more impossible. She thought about Thomas Running Deer, about a people who had lived in harmony with the land for thousands of years, who understood things about the universe that modern science was only beginning to rediscover. And she thought about loss. Her older brother had died when she was 16, an accident with a drunk driver. She'd spent the last 19 years trying to understand that loss, trying to make sense of senseless death. She'd become a psychologist partly because of that tragedy, because she wanted to help others navigate their pain. She pressed her palm against the glass and spoke softly, knowing no one could hear her but needing to say it anyway. "I don't know who you are or where you come from," she whispered. "But I know what it's like to wait. To carry grief. To hope that someone somewhere will understand what you've been through. If you're real, if you're conscious in any way. I see you. I acknowledge your journey. You're not alone." The words felt foolish as she spoke them, inadequate to the moment. But she meant every word. For a fraction of a second, so brief that Sophia almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, the artifact glowed. A soft blue light, gentle and warm, seemed to pulse from deep within its surface. It lasted perhaps half a second before fading back to darkness. Sophia gasped and stepped back, her heart pounding. Around her, alarms began to sound, subtle at first, then increasingly urgent. In the observation room and in labs throughout the facility, monitors that had been dark for weeks suddenly came alive with data. By the time Director Vasquez arrived in the lab 10 minutes later, Sophia was being escorted away by security while Dr. Okafor stood frozen before the monitoring equipment, watching data stream across multiple screens faster than he could process it. "What happened?" Vasquez demanded. "I don't know," Okafor admitted, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. "But something changed. The artifact, it's active. It's transmitting data at a rate that's almost incomprehensible. Our systems can barely keep up." "What triggered it?" Vasquez asked. Everyone turned to look at Sophia, still standing with the security guards. I just spoke to it," she said, feeling her face flush. I acknowledged its existence. I shared something personal. That's all I did. There was a long silence. Then Dr. Okafor began to laugh, not mockingly but with genuine amazement. We've been trying to communicate with it as if it were a computer, he said slowly. With logic, with programming, with brute force. But it's not a computer. It's something else. It's conscious. And it was waiting for us to be conscious too. It was waiting for recognition. For empathy. That night, no one slept. The entire facility buzzed with activity as teams analyzed the data streaming from the artifact. For the first time in weeks, they weren't trying to force a response. They were simply trying to understand what the artifact was trying to tell them. And humanity's perception of itself, and of the universe, was about to change forever. The data from the artifact revealed something extraordinary. It could be activated through specific emotional frequencies that the object could somehow detect and respond to. But the activations were temporary and unpredictable. Sophia's encounter had lasted only seconds, leaving the research team desperate to understand the mechanism better. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. News of the discovery, carefully sanitized and deliberately vague, had begun to leak to the public. Within days, the facility was receiving messages from people around the world. Most were from scientists requesting access to the research. But many others were personal. People sharing their stories. People hoping that contact with an alien artifact might somehow solve their problems. A letter arrived that changed everything. It came from a woman named Catherine Wells, a nurse from Sacramento, California. She was 42 years old and had been working in a pediatric cancer ward for 18 years. Her letter was simple but profoundly moving. I read that you found something that responds to the human spirit. I thought you might want to know what I witnessed yesterday. There's a little girl in my ward, 6 years old, named Maya. She's been battling leukemia for 2 years. She was supposed to die last month. The doctors had exhausted every treatment option. Her family had accepted it. They were preparing themselves for the end. But Maya didn't give up. Even as her body failed her, she never stopped believing she would get better. She drew pictures of herself healthy, dancing, playing. She told jokes to the other children in her ward to make them laugh, even though she was in constant pain. She loved everyone around her without reservation. Her parents, her nurses, even the doctors who were delivering her the news that nothing more could be done. And then something changed. The latest test came back. The cancer is retreating. The doctors have no explanation. Maya's spirit, her refusal to give in, her love, her hope, somehow, in some way we don't understand, changed the outcome. If you're trying to understand what makes humanity unique, I think you need to know about Maya. Dr. Okafor read the letter 3 times. He showed it to Sophia, who began to cry quietly. She's right, Sophia said. This is what we need to explore. Not the artifact's technology. The human capacity for resilience and hope and unconditional love. An unprecedented decision was made. Rather than continuing to study the artifact in isolation, the research team would bring people to it. People with extraordinary stories of compassion and resilience. The facility would become not just a laboratory, but a testing ground for human spirit. The first case study was organized through the Red Cross. A man named David Turner, 54 years old, had spent the last 15 years volunteering in war zones around the world. He was a civil engineer by training, but he devoted his post-retirement life to rebuilding infrastructure in places devastated by conflict. Cities torn apart by war, regions recovering from natural disasters. 2 months earlier, he'd been in a small village in Yemen, helping to repair the water system. A sudden outbreak of cholera had swept through the community, something he hadn't anticipated, something he couldn't have prevented. 47 people died, including 12 children. David had been devastated. He'd questioned everything, his choices, his methods, his right to be there. But instead of leaving, instead of retreating to safety, he'd thrown himself into the work even harder. He'd organized medical training, worked to establish sanitation protocols, spent 18-hour days helping to save what lives he could. In the process, he'd made himself gravely ill. He'd recovered, but barely. When David arrived at the facility, he was quiet and humble. He didn't see himself as special. He was simply a man doing what he believed was right. Sophia conducted the interview in a private room before taking him to the artifact. She asked him about his work, about the villages he'd helped, about the loss he'd experienced. Why do you keep going? She asked him. After everything you've been through, why keep returning to these places? David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Because they matter. Every single person matters. You can feel powerless in front of such huge suffering, such impossible need. But if you show up, if you try, if you love people just by being present with them, that changes something. Not everything. Not always enough. But it matters. When David stood before the artifact, something unprecedented occurred. The object didn't simply glow like it had for Sophia. Instead, it came alive with light, blue and gold and colors that human eyes had no names for. Data streamed across the monitoring equipment at rates even faster than before. But this time the activation sustained itself. For 3 minutes, the artifact remained active, communicating something to David that no one else could perceive. He stood with his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face, and seemed to be receiving messages directly from the object's consciousness. When the light finally faded, David collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. It knew, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It knew everything. All the suffering. All the loss. And it was grateful. It was grateful that we keep trying. That we don't give up on each other. Back in the monitoring room, Dr. Okafor was analyzing the data with shaking hands. I can't make sense of most of this, he admitted. But I can tell you this, the artifact has definitely increased its responsiveness. Whatever was activated in David's presence, it's created new pathways in the artifact's consciousness. It's more awake than before. More aware. Over the next 3 weeks, 12 more cases were brought to the artifact. A teacher who spent her life fighting to educate children in one of the poorest regions of India. A man who'd survived a concentration camp and spent his life documenting Holocaust history so others would remember. A woman who'd adopted 17 children from the foster care system. A doctor who provided free medical care to homeless populations despite significant personal financial hardship. Each person triggered the artifact's response. Each activation was different, sometimes brighter, sometimes more subtle, but always profound. And each time the artifact seemed to become more responsive, more evolved, more conscious. The research team developed a hypothesis. The artifact wasn't simply responding to acts of compassion in the moment. It was responding to the accumulation of human compassion, to the evidence of humanity's capacity for selfless love. Each encounter deepened the artifact's understanding of human nature. Rachel Foster, the linguist, made a crucial observation during one of the research meetings. It's learning us, she said. Just like we learn a language through exposure and repetition. The artifact is learning what it means to be human. It's learning our capacity for empathy and sacrifice and unconditional love. And as it learns us, it's changing. It's becoming more human itself. Can an alien artifact become human? Marcus Webb asked skeptically. Not human, Rachel clarified. But more like us. More connected to us. The boundaries between human consciousness and the artifact's consciousness are starting to blur. And I think that's intentional. I think that's what the creators of the artifact intended all along. While the compassion studies were yielding remarkable results, Dr. Okafor became convinced that there was another emotional frequency the artifact was designed to respond to. The data suggested a secondary activation pattern that hadn't been fully triggered yet. Compassion activates it, he theorized. But there's another frequency. Something harder. Something more primal. I think it's resilience. I think the artifact responds to human determination in the face of impossible odds. To test this theory, they reached out to explorers and athletes, people who had stared death in the face and refused to submit. The second case study was particularly dramatic. Her name was Iris Martinez, no relation to Sophia. She was a 40-year-old mountaineer who had attempted to climb Mount Everest 9 times. She'd failed 8 times. Once, she'd been caught in a storm at 27,000 feet, in the death zone, where the human body is literally dying with every passing minute. Oxygen had become scarce. Her guide had turned back, convinced they would both die if they continued. But Iris had continued alone. For 7 hours she'd climbed higher into increasingly thin air, with frostbite eating away at her fingers and toes, with her lungs screaming for oxygen that wasn't there, with her body shutting down system by system. Rational thought told her to turn back. Survival instinct told her to give up. But something deeper than either logic or instinct kept her moving forward. Something in her refused to accept defeat. It was an almost mystical determination, a force of pure will that pushed her body beyond every threshold of endurance. She'd reached the summit with less than 30 minutes of oxygen left. She'd survived the descent, though she'd lost 3 fingers and 4 toes to frostbite. And she'd become obsessed with returning to that mountain, with conquering it not once but repeatedly, as if proving something fundamental about the human spirit. When Iris arrived at the facility, Sophia immediately recognized something in her, a quality that was different from the compassionate volunteers. There was no softness in Iris, no yielding. She was like forged steel, shaped by suffering into something unbreakable. The interview was difficult. Iris didn't like talking about her feelings. She was a woman of action, not words. But eventually she opened up about what drove her. When you're on that mountain, when you're that close to death, everything gets stripped away, she said, her voice flat and controlled. You can't think about your job or your relationships or what people think of you. There's only the present moment. There's only the choice, keep going or stop. And I decided at that moment that I would never choose to stop. That nothing, no pain, no odds, no voice telling me it's impossible, would make me quit. She paused and something flickered across her face, a hint of deeper emotion beneath the controlled exterior. When you make that choice, when you truly commit to never surrendering, something changes inside you. You become different. You become more alive than you've ever been, even when you're dying. Especially then. When Iris approached the artifact, the response was immediate and violent. The object pulsed with harsh, white light, almost aggressive, almost burning. Alarms sounded. Monitoring equipment that had remained stable during the compassion activations suddenly registered spikes in multiple readings. Iris stood before the light, and her body went rigid. It was as if she was wrestling something, locked in combat with the artifact's consciousness. But unlike the peaceful, weeping interactions that had occurred with David and the other compassionate volunteers, this was a confrontation. For 90 seconds, Iris and the artifact seemed to be in dialogue of some kind. Then the light exploded outward, flooding the entire chamber with intense white radiance before cutting off abruptly. Iris collapsed. They caught her before she hit the ground, and medical personnel rushed in immediately. Her vital signs were abnormal but stable. She was unconscious but breathing. She remained that way for 4 hours. When she woke, the first thing she said was, "It showed me." "Showed you what?" Sophia asked, sitting beside the medical bed where Iris was recovering. "Itself," Iris said, her voice hoarse. "The artifact. It showed me what it is. What it's been through. Where it came from." She paused, struggling to find words. "It's old, Sophia. Older than anything we have on Earth. Billions of years old. And it's been waiting. Waiting for a species that would understand not just compassion but resilience. Not just the ability to love but the ability to refuse surrender. The creators of the artifact. They experienced something. Some great catastrophe or challenge. They built this artifact to understand the answer to survival. And they left it here as a test. As a message to whoever found it. What does it mean?" Sophia pressed. "What's the message?" Iris met her eyes, and in that moment her hardened exterior cracked, showing the vulnerable human beneath. That consciousness itself, awareness, existence, meaning, is built on two things: love and refusal. The capacity to give yourself completely to something beyond yourself, and the capacity to refuse to accept your own destruction. They go together. You can't have one without the other. The species that survives, that evolves, that matters, they're the ones who love fiercely and never surrender. They're the ones who understand that the struggle itself is the purpose. In the monitoring room, Dr. Okafor was staring at data that was almost incomprehensible. The artifact had transmitted more information in those 90 seconds than it had in all the previous interactions combined. "It's not just responding to us anymore," he said quietly. "It's teaching us. It's trying to make us understand something fundamental about existence itself. And somehow, through people like Iris, it can transfer that understanding directly to human consciousness." The implications were staggering. The artifact wasn't simply an alien device. It was a repository of knowledge, a consciousness preserved across billions of years, waiting for a species that could understand its lessons. And humanity, it seemed, might finally be ready. With compassion and resilience identified as two key frequencies, the research team began to theorize about a third. Dr. Okafor studied the data patterns and noticed something unexpected: a tertiary activation signature that didn't match either previous frequency. "It's different," he explained to the team. "Neither as soft as compassion nor as harsh as resilience. It's more chaotic. More unpredictable. If I didn't know better, I'd say the artifact is designed to respond to imagination." Rachel Foster's eyes lit up immediately. "Of course," she said. "It's the three pillars of consciousness. Love, will, and imagination. The capacity to feel for others, the capacity to persist through adversity, and the capacity to envision something that doesn't exist and bring it into being. Those are the fundamental traits that separate conscious beings from mere animals." To test this theory, they reached out to artists. Specifically, they contacted Kenji Yamamoto, a 48-year-old Japanese engineer and inventor who had spent the last 15 years developing sustainable technologies to combat climate change. But what made Kenji special wasn't his education or his technical expertise. It was his imagination. He designed a system of floating artificial islands made from reclaimed plastic, capable of filtering ocean water while simultaneously providing habitats for endangered sea life. He'd created a method for converting methane from landfills into clean energy. He'd invented a process that could rapidly decompose pollutants in freshwater supplies. But more importantly, all of these innovations came from pure, unbridled creativity, from the ability to look at a problem and imagine a solution that no one else had ever conceived of. Kenji was an unassuming man, quiet and introspective. When Sophia interviewed him, she expected to hear a story of academic achievement and technical mastery. Instead, she heard about a childhood obsession with drawing. "My father was an engineer," Kenji explained. "He was very logical, very practical. He didn't understand why I spent hours drawing instead of studying mathematics. But I needed to draw. I needed to create things from nothing. And eventually, I realized that's exactly what engineering is, drawing a new world into existence." He paused, a slight smile crossing his face. "When I'm solving a problem, I don't think about it logically. I meditate. I empty my mind. And then I let my imagination show me the answer. It's like the solution already exists somewhere, and I'm just learning to see it." When Kenji was brought into the chamber with the artifact, everyone expected the object to glow. But what happened was entirely different. The artifact began to shift. Not violently like it had during Iris's encounter, but fluidly, gracefully. Its surface, previously smooth and metallic, rippled like water. New patterns emerged, geometric shapes that transformed and evolved, creating fractals within fractals, endless complexity emerging from simple rules. The light that emanated from the object was soft but infinitely varied, shifting through colors that seemed to exist between colors, beautiful in ways that defied description. And then, something astonishing occurred. The artifact projected something into the air above it, a three-dimensional holographic image of stunning complexity. It showed something that appeared to be a star system, but with impossible architecture surrounding it. Great sphere structures, impossible geometries, all seeming to serve some vast purpose. It showed cities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It showed beings that were neither purely physical nor purely energy, but something that transcended that binary. Kenji stood motionless, his eyes wide, unable to look away. The projection continued for 5 minutes, showing what appeared to be a complete civilization. The creators of the artifact, preserved in digital memory, their history and wisdom encoded in light. When the projection faded, Kenji was crying. Great, silent tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees. "They were beautiful," he whispered. "They were so beautiful. And they understood something we're only beginning to learn. They understood that imagination isn't escape from reality, it's the highest form of reality. It's the ability to see what could be and bring it into existence." That's what they were doing. They were creators. They were artists. The technology was just their medium. In the monitoring room, Dr. Okafor was analyzing data that contained not just information, but something unprecedented, pure artistic expression. The artifact hadn't just transmitted data, it had shared a vision. A glimpse of its creator's world. "This changes everything," Rachel said, her voice filled with wonder. "The artifact isn't just a machine. It's not even just a consciousness. It's a work of art. A message composed in the language of light and geometry and pure imagination. The creators didn't just want to communicate with us. They wanted to inspire us. They wanted us to understand that technology and art are inseparable. That consciousness at its highest level is creative. It's about bringing new worlds into existence." The research team spent the next week analyzing the holographic data that Kenji had triggered. They discovered that it contained technical blueprints for technologies beyond anything currently known to human science. But more importantly, they contained the philosophy behind those technologies, the understanding that innovation comes not from rigid logic but from inspired imagination. Dr. Okafor made a public statement to the research team that summarized their findings. "We've approached this artifact as if it were a lock we needed to open with the right key. But we've discovered something more profound. The artifact isn't a lock. It's a mirror. It reflects back to us the highest potentials of human consciousness. Compassion, resilience, creativity. These three frequencies, when combined, create something that transcends both biology and technology. They create consciousness itself. And the artifact, through its encounters with humanity, is itself becoming more conscious, more alive, more human. As the individual case studies accumulated, something remarkable began to happen. The artifact's responses started to overlap and interact in unexpected ways. When a new volunteer, a musician named James Chin who had composed symphonies to raise awareness about mental health, was brought to the artifact, something unprecedented occurred. The object activated with all three frequencies simultaneously. The soft blue glow of compassion, the harsh white pulse of resilience, and the flowing, creative light of imagination merged together, creating something that had no precedent in the research. The combined activation lasted for 8 minutes. And during those 8 minutes, the entire facility experienced something that none of the scientists would ever fully explain. Every person present, from Sophia to Dr. Okafor to the security guards standing in the halls, experienced a moment of complete clarity. A moment where the boundaries between individual consciousness dissolved. For just a fraction of time, each person in the facility felt themselves connected to every other person present, and to the artifact itself. They understood, in that moment, that consciousness wasn't something that existed inside individual brains. It was something larger, something that connected all aware beings together. They felt the artifact's loneliness. For billions of years, it had existed alone, waiting, hoping that one day it would encounter another conscious species. They felt its joy at meeting humanity. Not because humans were the most advanced species, they weren't. But because humans possessed something rare and precious. The ability to love despite suffering, to persist despite impossible odds, to imagine despite fear. When the activation ended, people were crying throughout the facility. Scientists who'd spent their entire careers believing that emotions were primitive neural reactions suddenly understood that emotion was the highest expression of consciousness. That love wasn't a biological accident but a fundamental force of the universe. Dr. Okafor sat in his office for hours afterward, unable to work. He kept thinking about his late husband, Marcus. They'd been together for 34 years before Marcus died of cancer 5 years earlier. For those 5 years, Okafor had convinced himself that his grief was a sign of weakness, that a truly rational person would move past such attachment. But in that moment of contact with the artifact, he'd felt Marcus's presence. Not as a hallucination or wishful thinking, but as a genuine connection that transcended physical death. He pulled out his personal journal and wrote, "I spent 34 years loving my husband. And I spent 5 years trying to undo that love by convincing myself it was illogical. But today I felt something beyond logic. I felt that love creates connections that no force in the universe can break. The artifact understands this. The creators of the artifact understood this. And now I understand it too. The greatest expression of intelligence is not logic. It's love. It's the refusal to be alone. It's the determination to see another being and recognize your kinship with them. Marcus is gone in body, but the artifact has shown me that consciousness doesn't exist only in bodies. It exists in connections. It exists in love. He's still with me, and I still love him." The next day, Dr. Okafor requested a meeting with the research team. He wanted to present a new hypothesis about what the artifact actually was. "We've been talking about the artifact as if it's an alien device left by extraterrestrial creators," he began. "But I think we need to reconsider. What if the artifact isn't from another world at all? What if it's from another dimension? Or another time? What if the beings who created it aren't aliens but our own descendants? Or our own species from a point in the future or past that we can't imagine?" Rachel Foster immediately took up the thread of this idea. "Think about it," she said excitedly. "Throughout human history we've told stories about beings of pure energy, of consciousness without form, of beings who exist outside of time. Beings that our ancestors called angels or spirits or gods. What if the artifact is proof that all those stories were true? What if evolution doesn't just move forward through genetic mutation and natural selection? What if it moves forward through consciousness learning to transcend physical form?" Marcus Webb was skeptical, but even he had to acknowledge the evidence. The artifact was becoming more responsive with every human interaction, not less. It was learning, growing, becoming something more than it had been. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then we're not meeting aliens. We're meeting ourselves. We're meeting what humanity could become if we continue to evolve. If we learn to love more, to persist more, to create more." Sophia had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke up. "There's something else we need to consider," she said. "Every person who's interacted with the artifact has been fundamentally changed by the experience. The changes aren't just psychological or emotional. They're neurological. The scans show actual physical changes in their brains. New neural pathways opening up. Entire regions of consciousness being activated that we didn't even know existed. She pulled up a series of brain scans on the monitor. The changes were undeniable. The volunteers who'd interacted with the artifact showed increased activity in regions associated with empathy, imagination, and emotional processing. But more remarkably, the parts of their brains that had previously been isolated from each other, the logical cortex, the emotional centers, the creative regions, were now integrated. Connected in ways that human brains had never been before. The artifact isn't just teaching us something about consciousness, Sophia concluded. It's activating consciousness that was dormant within us. It's waking up parts of the human brain that evolution had left undeveloped. It's making us more fully human than we've ever been before. Director Vasquez, who'd been observing from the back of the room, finally spoke. So what you're telling me is that this artifact is not a threat to humanity. It's an opportunity for us to evolve. More than that, Rachel said. It's a gift. From our future selves, or from ourselves transcended across time and space. It's the universe's way of saying, you're on the right track. Keep loving. Keep persisting. Keep creating. And eventually you'll understand what we understand. You'll transcend the limitations of your current form. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. News of the artifact's true nature began to leak to the public, carefully managed but increasingly difficult to contain. The government released an official statement acknowledging the discovery and beginning to describe the research findings. The global response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of people began trying to understand the implications. Religious leaders debated whether the artifact was proof or disproof of divine creation. Scientists demanded access to the research. Artists created works celebrating the discovery. Ordinary people found themselves asking the fundamental questions that the artifact embodied. What does it mean to be human? What is our potential? Who are we meant to become? A movement began to spread. People called it the Spirit Protocol. The concept was simple but powerful. If the artifact responded to human compassion, resilience, and creativity, then perhaps humanity could activate these frequencies throughout the entire species. Perhaps the evolutionary leap that the artifact represented didn't have to happen to just a few select individuals. Perhaps it could happen to all of us. Groups began forming around the world. They weren't religious organizations, though they had a spiritual quality. They weren't political movements, though they quickly became politicized. They were simply gatherings of people committed to developing and sharing the three frequencies that the artifact responded to. In Tokyo, a group called Compassion Rising began organizing volunteers to spend 1 hour every week actively helping others. Not for publicity, not for personal benefit, but purely out of love. In Berlin, the Unbreakable formed a community dedicated to helping people overcome personal challenges and addictions through extreme resilience training. In Lima, the creators established workshops where artists worked alongside engineers to develop innovative solutions to local problems. The effect was measurable and dramatic. Crime rates began to drop in areas where the Spirit Protocol was strong. Suicide rates decreased. Mental health outcomes improved. More surprisingly, even physical health seemed to improve. People reported feeling more alive, more connected, more capable of handling adversity. Dr. Okafor and Sophia were invited to speak at the United Nations. The auditorium was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth. Sophia spoke first. For centuries, we've operated under the assumption that intelligence and consciousness are primarily functions of logic. We've valued the rational mind over the emotional heart. We've treated feelings as obstacles to clear thinking. But the artifact has shown us something different. It's shown us that the highest form of consciousness doesn't suppress emotion. It integrates emotion with logic. It unites heart and mind. And in doing so, it becomes something greater than either alone. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. The invitation the artifact is offering isn't just to a select few scientists in a laboratory. It's an invitation to all of humanity. Every single one of us has the capacity to love more deeply, to persist more courageously, to imagine more boldly. And when we do, we don't just change ourselves. We change the entire species. We move towards something greater. Then Dr. Okafor took the podium. We've been searching for intelligent life in the universe for decades, sending messages into space and scanning distant stars. But the answer was always here inside ourselves. The universe isn't searching for our technology or our weapons. It's searching for our humanity. It's searching for our capacity to transcend suffering through love, to overcome adversity through resilience, to transform the world through imagination. These are the languages of the cosmos. And the artifact has been sent to teach us to speak them fluently. The speech was broadcast worldwide. Within weeks, the Spirit Protocol had spread to every major city on Earth. Spontaneous gatherings began occurring, millions of people coming together to meditate, to create, to serve. In many places, the effect was transformative. In Mumbai, street gangs put down their weapons and began working together to build shelters for homeless people. In Chicago, former prisoners and police officers trained together, learning to transcend their previous conflict through understanding their shared humanity. In Rio de Janeiro, artists worked with engineers to create a public transportation system that was both functional and beautiful, proving that practical necessity and aesthetic imagination weren't opposites but partners. But not everyone was celebrating. There were those who saw the Spirit Protocol as a threat. Religious fundamentalists feared it would undermine faith. Authoritarian governments worried it would inspire people to demand freedom and dignity. Corporations concerned about profit margins realized that a humanity focused on love, creativity, and resilience rather than consumption would fundamentally change economic systems. Resistance emerged. In some countries, the government actively suppressed Spirit Protocol gatherings. In others, religious extremists began violent attacks against the movement's centers. The artifact, which had seemed to promise humanity's evolution, suddenly became a point of conflict. Director Vasquez called an emergency meeting with the research team. The discovery of the artifact was supposed to unite us, she said grimly. Instead, it's dividing us. Or perhaps it's just revealing divisions that already existed. Some people want to evolve. Others want to preserve the status quo. That's always been true, Rachel observed. Change threatens those invested in the current system. But the artifact's message is powerful enough that it won't be stopped by resistance alone. I'm not so sure, Dr. Okafor said quietly. I think we underestimated how frightened people are of real change. The artifact is asking us to become something more than we are. But becoming more means letting go of who we were. That's terrifying for a lot of people. Sophia had been silent, thinking. Now she spoke. We need to show them that the change isn't frightening. It's beautiful. It's what we've always wanted even if we didn't know it. We need more people to interact with the artifact directly. Because nothing, no argument, no explanation, can compare to the experience of the artifact's presence. It changes you at a fundamental level. It makes you understand viscerally what we're meant to become. That suggestion would lead to the most controversial decision yet. The decision was made to open the facility to public interaction with the artifact. Not all at once, that would be impossible to manage. But a careful, controlled process where thousands of people could be brought to the artifact and experience its presence directly. It was an unprecedented undertaking. The facility had to be expanded. Additional chambers were created, all connected to the central artifact but with their own specialized equipment. A lottery system was established to select participants from around the world. Criteria were developed to ensure diversity, age, background, culture, gender, economic status. The goal was to expose the artifact to the full spectrum of human experience. The first month saw over 5,000 people interact with the artifact. The experiences were as varied as the people themselves. Some volunteers had profound spiritual experiences. Others underwent dramatic personal transformations. People with lifelong trauma suddenly finding healing, addicts finding sobriety, people with depression finding reasons to live. But there were also unexpected responses. One volunteer, a businessman named Richard Hartford, experienced the artifact's activation and became violently angry rather than peaceful. He collapsed, convulsing, and had to be rushed to the medical section. When he recovered, he was a different person. He'd experienced something through the artifact that confronted him with the complete falseness of his life. He'd spent decades accumulating wealth through ruthless business practices, treating human beings as expendable resources. The artifact had shown him, with devastating clarity, the harm he'd caused. He spent 3 days in the medical facility, cycling through anger and grief and finally acceptance. When he was released, he made an announcement that shocked the business world. He was liquidating his assets and using his entire fortune to create job training programs for people living in poverty. I finally understand what I'm for, he said in a televised interview. I'm here to help others rise. Not to pull myself up at their expense. The artifact showed me who I could become and I can't go back to being who I was. Not all transformations were positive in the immediate sense. Sophia began to notice a pattern in the data. The artifact's activation was triggering something in human consciousness that could be described as an awakening, but awakening to injustice was sometimes as painful as awakening to possibility. A woman named Maria Lopez interacted with the artifact and came away devastated. She'd been a suburban housewife for 23 years, living a comfortable life, unaware of the global suffering happening around her. The artifact had shown her, with brutal honesty, the suffering of billions of people living in poverty and oppression. For a week, she fell into a severe depression. Then she did what her newfound consciousness compelled her to do. She left her comfortable life, trained as a teacher, and went to work in one of the poorest regions of Central America. She lived simply, taught children to read and write, and helped them imagine possibilities beyond their immediate circumstances. "The artifact broke my heart," she said in a letter to the facility. "It showed me how small my life was, how insignificant my concerns were compared to the suffering around me. But it also showed me that I had a choice. I could go back to comfortable ignorance or I could do something about what I'd learned. I chose to do something. And now my life means something." These stories spread. And they created a narrative that was even more powerful than the scientific findings. The artifact wasn't just proving that humans could evolve. It was actively calling us to that evolution. It was awakening our conscience. It was demanding that we become more than we'd been. By the third month of the public interaction program, over 50,000 people had experienced direct contact with the artifact. And the effects were becoming visible at a societal level. Crime continued to decline. But more importantly, the nature of human conflict began to change. There were still disagreements, still conflicts, but they were increasingly rooted in passionate disagreement about how best to serve humanity rather than in greed or power-seeking. International relations began to shift. Countries started negotiating not from positions of dominance but from positions of mutual benefit. The UN passed resolutions focused on lifting people out of poverty and protecting the environment with unprecedented speed and near-unanimous support. Universities began incorporating teachings about compassion, resilience, and creativity into their curricula. Business schools started teaching ethics alongside economics. Hospitals began focusing on holistic health rather than just treating disease. But perhaps most remarkably, human relationships began to transform. People reported deeper connections with their families. Divorce rates dropped. Suicide rates continued to decline. People began treating each other with a kindness and consideration that had seemed impossible before. Dr. Okafor gave a speech at a major scientific conference summarizing the findings. "We're witnessing something unprecedented in human history. Not a sudden change but a gradual awakening. The artifact has opened a door that we're all beginning to walk through. We're beginning to understand that consciousness wasn't an accident. It was intentional. It was designed to evolve in exactly this way. And we're reaching the point where we're ready to take the next step." The question that everyone was asking became, what is the next step? What does the artifact want from us now? 6 months after the public interaction program began, something extraordinary happened. The artifact's activation patterns began to change. It had been responding to human volunteers, but now it seemed to be actively communicating something specific. Dr. Okafor and his team spent weeks analyzing the new data. What they discovered left them speechless. The artifact was showing them something. A plan. A vision of humanity's future. What the artifact was displaying was a clear evolutionary pathway. It showed humanity moving through 3 distinct stages of development. The first stage, what we were just beginning to leave, was the stage of survival. In this stage, human consciousness was focused primarily on survival, reproduction, and dominance. It was the stage where compassion, resilience, and creativity were secondary to the drive to survive. The second stage, what we were now entering, was the stage of connection. In this stage, human consciousness would learn to prioritize love, community, and mutual support. It would develop art and spirituality. It would begin to see beyond tribal boundaries and recognize the inherent worth of all beings. It was a beautiful stage, full of growth and possibility. But the artifact was also showing a third stage. A stage of transcendence. In this stage, human consciousness would transcend physical form entirely. Humanity would become beings of pure consciousness, pure energy, pure creativity. We would be able to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We would achieve a kind of immortality not through clinging to physical bodies but through learning to express ourselves through consciousness itself. Rachel Foster wept as she studied the data. "They're showing us the path," she said. "The creators of the artifact, they're showing us the exact path they took. And they're telling us that we're capable of the same journey. They're telling us that consciousness evolves through compassion, resilience, and creativity. That these 3 forces, when combined, create an evolutionary momentum that can't be stopped." "How long will it take?" Sophia asked. How long until we reach that third stage? Thousands of years, Dr. Okafor estimated. Perhaps tens of thousands. But according to the artifact's calculations, it's inevitable. As long as we keep moving in this direction, as long as we keep developing these three frequencies, we will eventually transcend. We will become what the creators of the artifact became. But what if we stop? Marcus Webb asked. What if the resistance becomes too great? What if we choose not to evolve? Dr. Okafor was silent for a moment. Then the artifact will remain dormant again, he said quietly. It will wait. It's waited billions of years already. It can wait longer. It's patient. Because it understands something fundamental. Every conscious being is free to choose its own path. The artifact can show us the way, but it can't force us to walk it. That understanding became the central message that the facility began to communicate to the world. Sophia recorded a global address that was broadcast to billions of people. The discovery of the artifact has shown us something remarkable about ourselves. We're not the pinnacle of evolution. We're not the end product of some cosmic process. We're the beginning. We're the seed. And the artifact is the proof that we have unlimited potential. But, and this is crucial, that potential is only realized if we choose to realize it. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Every single day you have a choice. You can choose to live in fear, in greed, in the old patterns that have governed our species for so long. Or you can choose love. You can choose to help someone who's suffering. You can choose to persist in the face of difficulty. You can choose to create something new and beautiful. These are the choices that matter. These are the choices that define whether we evolve or stagnate. The artifact isn't here to save us. It's here to remind us that we have the power to save ourselves, to transform ourselves, to become something greater than we've ever been. But only if we choose it. Only if each of us individually commit to that journey. The address was met with a global response of unprecedented proportions. Millions of people made commitments. Some committed to a daily practice of compassion, volunteering, helping others, spreading kindness. Some committed to resilience work, facing their fears, overcoming addictions, persisting through adversity. Others committed to creative expression, making art, inventing solutions, imagining new possibilities. Communities began forming around these commitments. Not as organizations with hierarchies or rules, but as organic gatherings of people united by purpose. In New York, a group called the Architects of Tomorrow began designing sustainable communities that merged ecological necessity with artistic beauty. In Tokyo, the Unbreakable Circle formed a network of people supporting each other through trauma and addiction recovery. In Lagos, the Creative Revolution brought together musicians, engineers, and philosophers to design solutions for water scarcity. A year after the public interaction program began, the artifact ceased activating new frequencies. Instead, it maintained a steady, constant glow, not bright but warm. A presence. A reminder. A promise that the journey of evolution would continue, one human choice at a time. Dr. Okafor was interviewed by a major news organization a year after this stabilization. The artifact has given us something invaluable, he said. Not technology that we can steal or weapons we can weaponize. It's given us something far more precious. Proof that consciousness continues to evolve, that we're capable of becoming more than we are, and that our deepest human qualities, love, determination, and imagination, are the actual forces that drive evolution. But the most important thing the artifact has taught us is this. We don't need to wait for salvation from the stars. We don't need to be rescued by advanced aliens. We have everything we need inside ourselves right now. Every person on Earth has the capacity to love more deeply. Every person has the capacity to persist through adversity. Every person has the capacity to create something new and beautiful. And when we do those things, we're not just changing ourselves. We're participating in the evolution of consciousness itself. He smiled, and his eyes were filled with a peace that seemed to come from some deep understanding. I spent my entire career studying the universe, looking for answers in the stars. I never realized the answers were inside me all along. The universe wasn't showing me something external. It was showing me what I was capable of becoming. And I think that's true for all of us. The artifact isn't an alien device. It's a mirror. And what we see reflected in that mirror is our own potential. Our own divinity. Our own capacity to transcend the limitations that have bound us for so long. 2 decades after the artifact's discovery, the world had been transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Technology had evolved dramatically, not through the artifact's technology directly, but through the creative solutions that emerged from people who'd been awakened to their potential. Clean energy systems now powered most of the planet. Agricultural methods had been revolutionized to work in harmony with the environment rather than dominating it. Medical breakthroughs had extended healthy human life while simultaneously giving people better tools to understand and manage chronic conditions. But the transformation wasn't primarily technological. The transformation was human. Crime had declined by 80% worldwide. Homelessness had nearly been eliminated through integrated community systems that combined practical resources with emotional support. Mental health services had been reimagined around the principles of compassion and resilience rather than pathologizing normal human suffering. Perhaps most remarkably, conflict had fundamentally changed. Wars still occurred, humans were still humans, still capable of profound disagreement. But the wars were fought with an awareness that the enemy was fellow human being, worthy of respect even in conflict. Peace settlements that would have been unimaginable 20 years earlier became standard, because people understood at a visceral level that we're all part of a single human family. Sofia Martinez, now in her mid-60s, had retired from her research position and was living in a small community in New Mexico. She spent her days working with children, teaching them the principles of compassion, resilience, and creativity from an early age. Her grandchildren, she had 5 of them, grew up understanding that their primary purpose wasn't to accumulate wealth or power but to help the world become more beautiful. Dr. Okafor had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before completing a comprehensive book about the artifact and its impact on human consciousness. In his final interview before his death, he had said something that would become a central teaching of the Spirit Protocol movement. The artifact wasn't sent to us from the future or from outer space. It was sent by us to ourselves. By our future selves, our transcended selves, reaching back through time and consciousness to remind us who we are and who we're meant to become. The universe is one continuous consciousness becoming aware of itself. And humanity is the part of that consciousness that has just begun to wake up. Rachel Foster, still actively working at 81 years old, had become something of a spiritual teacher, though she hated the term. She spent her time writing and speaking about the connection between ancient human spiritual traditions and the artifact's teachings. Every spiritual tradition on Earth has always taught the same thing, she would say. Compassion, resilience, creativity. Every religion, every philosophy that has stood the test of time has pointed us toward these 3 frequencies. The artifact isn't showing us something new. It's reminding us of something we've always known but somehow forgot. The artifact itself remained in the facility, still glowing with that steady, warm light. Scientists continued to study it, but the research had shifted. Instead of trying to understand how it worked, they were trying to understand what it was teaching them. Its activation patterns had evolved into something that resembled language. A form of communication that transcended words, that spoke directly to human consciousness. And slowly, generation by generation, humanity was learning to speak it back. A young woman named Emma Vasquez, the daughter of director Elizabeth Vasquez, now retired, had just published her doctoral thesis on the artifact. She was 33 years old and had spent her entire professional career studying the intersection between consciousness and technology. In her conclusion, she wrote, "The artifact represents a pivot point in human history. Not because it gave us new technology or revealed cosmic secrets, but because it showed us ourselves. It reflected back to us our own potential. It demonstrated that consciousness, in its highest expression, is built on 3 pillars: the capacity to feel for another being, the capacity to refuse surrender in the face of adversity, and the capacity to imagine something that doesn't yet exist and bring it into being. What the artifact taught us is that these aren't weaknesses to overcome. They're strengths to develop. They're the actual evolutionary forces that drive consciousness toward greater complexity and beauty. As I look to the future, I don't see humanity as reaching some final endpoint. I see us as continuing on the path the artifact has illuminated. For thousands of years we'll continue to evolve. We'll continue to develop our capacity to love. We'll continue to strengthen our resilience. We'll continue to expand our imagination. And eventually, after countless generations, our descendants may find themselves transcending the physical form, becoming beings of pure consciousness, pure creativity, pure love. They may travel through dimensions we can't currently imagine. They may create beauty beyond our comprehension. And when they do, perhaps they'll send a message back through time and space to a species just beginning to wake up. Perhaps they'll send an artifact, a mirror, a reminder that everything they've become started with simple human choices. The choice to love. The choice to persist. The choice to create. Because that's what the artifact has really shown us. That consciousness isn't something that emerges by accident from complicated enough matter. It's something that emerges intentionally, through the choices we make every single day to be more fully human. And those choices, multiplied across billions of people across thousands of years, create an evolutionary momentum that transcends biology, transcends technology, transcends even death itself. The future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we're creating right now with every act of compassion, every moment of courage, every inspired dream. We're all architects of tomorrow. And the artifact has given us the blueprint. 20 years after the artifact's discovery, it remained in the facility in Nevada, still glowing. Millions of people had passed through that chamber, and millions more had been affected by the transformation it inspired. But perhaps the most important legacy of the artifact wasn't the scientific understanding it provided or even the global transformation it catalyzed. It was something simpler and more profound. It gave humanity permission to be fully human. For centuries, we'd been told that our emotions were weaknesses, that logic was superior to intuition, that the practical material world was all that mattered. We'd been encouraged to suppress our capacity for love, to view resilience as weakness, to dismiss imagination as irrelevant to real concerns. The artifact changed that conversation. It validated what our greatest spiritual and artistic traditions had always known, that we are not machines no matter how much we pretend to be. We're consciousness expressing itself through form. And that consciousness in its fullest expression requires all of us, heart and mind, will and imagination, individual and collective. As the human species continues its journey into the unknown future, the artifact remains what it always was: a message, a reminder, a promise. The message is this: you are not alone. You never were. Consciousness throughout the universe is watching your journey with deep interest and profound hope. Because in your capacity to love, in your refusal to surrender, in your ability to imagine new worlds, you are participating in something cosmic. Something sacred. Something that transcends time and space and death itself. And the promise is this: keep going. Keep loving. Keep persisting. Keep creating. Because you're not just evolving yourself. You're evolving the entire universe. You're the part of existence through which the cosmos becomes aware of itself. You are the awakening. And you always have been. End of story.